talk about overgeneralization because that is a thinking trap, a cognitive distortion that many high performers and people in general fall into. And again, what I found to be so helpful when it comes to rebuilding your identity, really working at your highest level, improving your performance, you have to understand how you think. You have to understand the traps that you fall into because those traps will increase your suffering. All right. And basically, all thinking traps are shame-induced thought patterns. And it's the toxic shame-induced thought pattern that we really want to minimize. So all thinking traps are shame-induced thought patterns that tend to fall into really three categories. They're either going to be self-put-downs. These are how they're going to manifest. They're either going to be catastrophic thoughts about one's inability to handle the future. Some are going to be obvious than others. As well as the third one is it's going to be critical or shaming thoughts of remorse or regrets. So when my clients come work with me, the very first session we do is a root analysis. And this is where I give them 5 assessments and I really try to understand what are they thinking? How are they thinking? What is their identity like? What was their lived experience like? So that I can start to help them perform as their true self, right? It's very real for someone to come in and have multiple operating systems, which is why they are incongruent and not performing at the level they want to. So today we're just going to focus on overgeneralization, keep it short and sweet. Overgeneralization is where you focus on one incident to describe a situation or a person. So when people are overgeneralizing, again, this is a negative thinking pattern. It's an automatic thinking pattern. You're really an autopilot. You're not really paying attention to what you're thinking. You're going to use words like always, never, all, every, everybody, right? There's going to be these absolute words within the sentence, and it's going to be about a single event or experience, right? Overgeneralization is where you make a broad generalized conclusion based on a single incident or a piece of evidence, right? And it's really immature thinking because I think we could all agree that simply because something happens one time doesn't mean it's always going to happen, right? Plus, there's always the exception of the rule, right? And yes, I overgeneralize that. So there are times where this is actually quite fair to use, and this is what makes it somewhat tricky. Now, overgeneralizations can also play out as nominalizations, and this is where a process is made a thing. For example, my marriage is sick. So right there, that phrase is very much an overgeneralization. It's not using any of the words that I said it will use, like always, never, all, every, and everybody, right? These are just some examples, but it is taken one situation and made it an absolute. In reality, marriage is dynamic. Therefore, only some aspects of the marriage is most likely in trouble, not all of it. And typically, when someone has a lot of overgeneralizations, like when they score high in overgeneralizations, usually you could also guesstimate that they have moderate to low structure, meaning specification and precision in communication is not important to them. They are okay with ambiguous or ambivalent information or communication. I am someone that's highly, highly structured. If you talk to me and you use unspecific words or ambiguous words when we speak, I will interrupt you and be like, what are you talking about? There are too many this, that's, there, he, she, right? I need specification. So a lot of times when someone has overgeneralization tendencies, they are not someone that has high structure. So here are some examples. I'll never get that promotion. They always do that. He's such a douchebag because he did that one thing, right? You just utterly generalize his behavior based off of one thing he did. Or in the case of nominalizations, it's the country is going downhill. You know, it's saying this one thing and making it absolutely simplistic when a lot of these things are just more dynamic. So basically, you focus on your partner's failure to ask about your day and ignore all the other caring things he or she did, right? So that's another example of overgeneralization. Now, when someone struggles with overgeneralization, I know they struggle with pessimistic mindsets. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people are clueless to their pessimism because it's very easy to lie to yourself. I have done over 1,000 psychometrics. I literally analyze people for a living. I'm very good at it. I'm very fast at it. And it is always amazing to me to see how many people are in fantasies, how many people, especially high performers, disassociate. It's very, very real. So many people live in a fantasy. And in my opinion, the marketing world keeps selling us a fantasy that's not real. Overgeneralization will also mean that there's a reactiveness in their thinking, and they will make quick assumptions before getting the facts. And overgeneralization is also an indicator of perfectionism. Honestly, most people have perfectionism, right? Even type B people have some level of perfectionism. So let's look at how overgeneralization manifests, right? Because we're just looking at the linguistics right there, when I also want to talk to you about how it manifests. So one of the biggest ways it's going to manifest is through that critical self-talk. And in fact, with overgeneralization, there's always going to be a level of double-mindedness. Maybe not always, but there's a high chance of double-mindedness also being within the person's identity. And that means they're going to be more susceptible to toxic shame spirals. In fact, toxic shame spirals is one of the major ways it keeps you from not accepting yourself and being divided with yourself, specifically when it's generalized untrue statements, which is what the overgeneralization thinking trap will do, right? And so that critical self-talk via generalizations is what's going to happen, meaning you're going to have judgments and conditions of worth. And it's going to lead to universal qualifiers like, I will always have to struggle. I will never get ahead. Why can't I ever get it right? No one would love me if they really knew me. Now, this distortion results from toxic shame's grandiosity. It will also lead a person to a restricted lifestyle, meaning a person will present a grandiose absolutizing, which implies that some immutable law governs their chances of happiness, but really, you will just intensify your toxic shame. So to say this in a simplified version, when you struggle with overgeneralization, you've decided the rules of life sometimes don't apply to you the same way they may apply to everyone else. Either nothing will work for you or everything has to go a specific way for you to be okay. Now, either way, it's shame running the show because underneath the grandiosity or the rigid rules is a belief that the individual is fundamentally different from other people in a way that disqualifies them from ordinary happiness. And the law, I'm saying that in air quotes, that we're describing is never actually about circumstances. It's about identity. Unfortunately, they've just dressed it up in logic, right? So it sounds like observations instead of wounds. And I will say, based off of my 1,000+ people I've done psychometrics on and my aggregated data, I do see overgeneralization a little bit more with those who have a choleric, or if you are familiar with Winnie the Pooh, a rabbit mentality. Not always the case. It's just what I see. I just looked through my data and that's very much stood out. And I also mainly work with cholerics and melancholies and a lot of dominant men in very high stake positions, whether that be in the military or in corporate America or entrepreneurs. And this is something that I consistently see. Now, the antidote to overgeneralization is this. It's really to use a 3-column technique. And that means column 1 is you write all the evidence for the conclusion you're stating. The second column is evidence against your conclusion. And then the third column is alternative conclusions. I love that we're implementing an alternative conclusion to this because this is how we start to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is learning how to be curious. It's learning how to not see things in absolutes. It's really learning how to play in the gray. It's shifting from judgment to curiosity and kind of wondering, right? Because, for instance, I see this a lot when people struggle with overgeneralization. Someone will cut them off in traffic and they go, what an idiot, he's a jerk, right? Well, no, what he did was impulsive and perhaps not safe, but just because he did that doesn't mean he's a jerk, right? And this is really the complexity of life that we don't talk about because it is a lot more energy and more words than if you just absolute it and overgeneralize the individual. Now, I can't speak for you, but I have done silly things when I wasn't thinking while driving. And so that third column really allows us to leverage mindfulness, kind of coming up with all of the potential things that could have been going on in that person's mind for them to do what they do. And also holding the truth that you might not ever know the real reason, and that's actually okay. You don't have to have that information. And so as you go throughout about your day-to-day, I want you to either pay attention to when you're overgeneralizing, when you're using words like always or never, or making these blanket statements about situations, or when you start to turn something that's not, where you start to turn a process into a thing, or something that's dynamic into something that's very, very simplistic. And also listen to other people's language, listen to what other people are saying and doing, right? Because then you can start to observe them and start to leverage that mindfulness thinking a little bit easier, a little bit more naturally, right? Like, I love mindfulness. I think mindfulness is great. I'm not a big fan of mindfulness meditation because I just don't really care to do meditations. That's just not my cup of tea. I used to do them. 10 years ago, I did them. But now I'm not really into meditation like I once was. But there's lots of forms of meditation. I hope you found today helpful. We're going to keep going through these thinking traps so that they can help you grow your awareness. Keep it short and sweet and to the point. I'm rooting for you. Have a good day.